So what do both polls mean for relations between China and the United States? Will these opinions change with a warming of relations? And also, how does public opinion factor into government decision-making, if at all? Well, joining me to discuss this topic are James Early, CEO of Stansberry China, and Professor JINZHAO from Beijing Foreign Universities. Great to have you both with us. So let's first take a look at these two polls. I want to get your reactions afterwards. Now, the poll from the Global Times shows that 90% of Chinese respondents, well, mostly netizens, they don't have a favorable opinion of the United States due to rising tensions between both countries. And likewise, 73% of Americans polled in an ongoing poll by Pew Research Center say that they have unfavorable views on China, although their anger is mostly geared towards the country's response and supposed mismanagement of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Mr. Early, let me start with you. These two polls show that both Chinese and Americans have unfavorable views of each other's countries, but how accurate are polls like these, and are these numbers a cause for concern?
Well, I mean, certainly I'm concerned, but I would say I'm even more sad than concerned to see this type of thing. You know, whereas national leaders can change very quickly, make a deal differently, public opinion can be a lot slower to change, especially these deep beliefs. In terms of accuracy, I think they're both directionally accurate, As someone who has done some statistical work with surveys in the past and worked with psychologists in this area, I would say the Global Times survey looks like it's been done more by propaganda people than by actual survey people. In other words, a lot of the questions are leading questions, or they seem to kind of bucket you into an answer, and people might be afraid to answer honestly. So I don't think it's extremely accurate, but I think it's directionally accurate, meaning maybe it's not 90% of the general population, but I still think the number is concerningly high.
What do you make of this, Professor Lee, of what's been said by Mr. Early, that the poll taken by Global Times, the question they portray might be loaded question, might be leading questions, the answers might not reflect what's going on in the public opinion sphere?
I agree with Mr. Early that the word is sad. I have the same reaction. It is really sad to see the percentage of disapproval so high on both sides toward each other. And I think that both the Global Times polls and the Pew Research Center's polls, they are conducted by authoritative sources. They specialized in collecting surveys. So I agree, it's directionally accurate. I mean, no polls are 100% accurate, but I think overall these two polls are reliable. They reflecting the majority of truth, I would say.
No poll is 100% accurate, but is public opinion ever a factor in political relations, Professor Lee? Again, I mean, will this sentiment be reflected into the two countries' foreign policy?
Well, public opinion is part of people-to-people interaction, so it is part of public diplomacy. Although public opinion does not vote directly in national foreign policy, they do exert a certain amount of impact on foreign policy. And especially in China, the public opinion actually is a reflection or a test of the government's policy. So again, I agree with Mr. Early that we really should pay due attention to these high rates of disapproval.
Mr. Early, what do you think of this? What's going to happen in America? I mean, will policymakers take, these kind of public opinions, polls into account? Will this kind of shape foreign policy directions?
Well, it's a complicated question, and it's a good question. The purpose of policy is not necessarily only to follow public opinion, meaning sometimes the public opinion is a reaction. I mean, some people in the U.S., the hawks, would certainly say this reaction is long overdue, meaning, China has been taking advantage of the U.S. for so long, and now Americans are waking up to this and seeing all these negative things about China, and frankly, a lot of the rest of the world is too. That's one way to view it. I think it's sad. I think this kind of thing takes a long time to change, though, and I think, unfortunately, right now, with the election coming up, Trump is seeing his numbers looking relatively low in the polls, and the idea of taking a tough chance on China is seen as something that's necessary to get elected for Trump and for Biden, too. This is something that Americans, frankly, want on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republicans, maybe to slightly different degrees on different issues, but this is something that has fairly unanimous approval, if you will, in the U.S., so it's going to get a lot of airtime in the election.
Now, the Pew poll suggests that most Americans have negative views of China because they feel that the country mishandled its coronavirus response. Now, given the Trump administration's readiness to blame China for COVID-19, is it possible that negative opinion is influenced solely by the president's scapegoating? Well, it looks like Professor Lee is not with us now, so let me put that question to James. Mr. Early, what do you think? How did the relationship between the two get so worse?
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a good question. I don't think, to go back to your specific question, I don't think it's influenced solely by the scapegoating. In fact, Trump, if you look, has low approval ratings now, has low credibility. So if it were just him, I don't think he has the power to influence the whole nation that much. And again, like I mentioned before, you see this in the UK, in Canada, in Japan, in Australia, in India, and parts of Europe too. There is generally a resistance against China. Part of it is the coronavirus, the perception that China, covered up and blamed these rumors, and it was all over the Chinese state media for a while that this wasn't a big deal, these were just rumors. And obviously, after that, we know China locked down very hard and frankly did a very admirable response that the rest of the world is still trying to match. But there's the initial perception of that, and I don't know if the Pew poll is probably too recent to incorporate Hong Kong, but I believe that's another hot point now. And then there's the Xinjiang issue with the Muslims. I think those are kind of the big three: the virus, Xinjiang, and Hong Kong, that the U.S. and much of the world is I guess complaining about, and those are the kind of things that, in reference to the other question, are hard to turn around quickly. I would love to sit here and say that I see an easy solution. The truth is that I don't.
Now, those issues are reflected in the polls, but from the Chinese perspectives, looking at the Global Times poll, Professor Lee, over 60% favored retaliation in some kind against the United States. Talk to us more about this. What are the reasons given for the Chinese distrust of America? In the face of continued escalation by the United States, what are the chances that this opinion may harden?
That's a very good question. I think part of this mistrust of Chinese netizens toward the United States has been a long-term built up mistrust, especially since the escalating of trade war, because from a lot of Chinese, average Chinese people's perspective, China has been ripped off in the U.S.-China trade and commerce. The popular saying is that out of every $100 of the iPhone, China is only profiting $5, and an average assembly worker in China only earns 30 cents out of this $100. This is just an example, but it demonstrates how the average ordinary Chinese people who have never got a chance to go abroad or never exposed to American people and American culture, how they feel. So this part of this mistrust has been built up for a while. But recently, a lot of the general Chinese educated population are getting mistrust because of this economic war, the trade war, because they feel that China has been repressed by the United States in different aspects, economic aspect, and also a lot of Chinese, they believe that the United States is using Hong Kong as human rights issue or suffrage issue as an excuse to interfere with China's domestic affairs. So this consensus has been built among the educated Chinese that the United States should not interfere with China's domestic affairs. Based on these two aspects, the political aspect and economic aspect, a lot of Chinese netizens feel that the Chinese government should do something to fight back.
There's really a big gap in understanding of each other's countries.
Indeed.
With regard to
Indeed.
several issues. Now, with the election coming up in America, Mr. Early, very briefly, we found another poll. This poll is from Political and Morning Consult. That in May, that poll found more American views China as a threat, but they trust Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden will handle the crisis better than Trump if elected. I mean, what could a Biden administration China policy look like, especially with the candidate saying himself that he is going to be much tougher on China?
It's a great question. I think it's not going to look on paper much different from a Trump policy, frankly, but I think we'll see more consistency, less difference between the bark and the bite. I mean, Trump talks a lot, but actually his actions on China until recently have not been very strong. Ironically, I think Biden will be a little bit tougher in his actions, and his words will probably be about the same level.
All right, we're going to have to wait and see what's going to happen. Thank you very much. Thank you to my guests, Mr. James Early, CEO of Stansberry China, and Professor JINZHAO from Beijing Foreign Studies University. That's all the time we have for this discussion. Appreciate your perspectives. Now, that is it for this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing, and download the CGTN app to watch our show, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.